Grand rising, everyone. I'm coming to you live, Spirit and Coffee, Drama Coffee here. Uh, have you ever had a day that was just off, right? It's kind of funny because in Kung Fu, Master Abraham, who's our teacher, instructor, Sifu, he was like, there's those days you're off and then energy's just off and everything just, there's a misstep or something happens. Anyway, that was yesterday for me. I broke a plate. It was just the synchronicity, the timing was like there was something off, something in the vortex. Anywho, I just thought I'd share because that does happen sometimes. We are off, and that is okay. You don't need to make up anything about it. It's just part of the equation, and we start again the next day or later on, or we reset or whatever. Anyway, that's what I did. Okay, so let's get started. We're reading in the Emerald Tablet Alchemy for Personal Transformation, an amazing book. Highly recommend that you read it because, of course, I talk more than I read. Good morning, Christina. Okay, so let's look here. As a source of alchemy, the Emerald Tablet contained all the steps necessary to unveil the one thing, the Holy Ghost within the world, which Jacob believed to be the key to the whole work. From his exalted viewpoint, he declared, "The work is easy. The act is simple. A boy of 16 years might make it, but the wisdom therein is great, and it is the greatest mystery." Such comments and his strange behavior caused inevitable friction between Jacob and the practical apprentices with whom he labored. In 1594, he was dismissed from an apprenticeship. Before completion, he returned to his home. Nevertheless, he opened a cobbler shop and soon married the daughter of a local tradesman. So, despite his lifestyle, Jacob continued to have visions, okay, enveloped by a brilliant light that lasted for several days. During the state, he became aware of archetypal essence at the heart of all creation, what he called the self interpreting signatures of all things. So, we see, and I was talking about this the other day, that we use the same language. No, we use different language to describe the same thing. And that's the way it goes. So now we're using what we call archetypes. Now, before they were talking about this, right? Personalities, archetypes are something that it's a little bit bigger than maybe the personality, but it's like the fabric of the essence that sort of not materializes, it's not the right word, but without a better word to describe it, kind of materializes, and then it becomes this thing that we are conscious of, and some people even take on the role of these particular energies, right? Let me say that energy might be a better word for it in the archetypal patterning. So there's like it arises, the energy sort of crystallizes together and creates and forms what we call these archetypes. That's kind of the same thing that he's saying. I mean, they're all kind of similar. It's not that they made up these new things, these new concepts. They just put different language to the same thing. And maybe they tweaked some of it a little bit, right? The concept, maybe they tweaked it just a little bit or whatnot, but it's the same thing. Okay. And it's been happening forever. And when you can tap into it, you understand how it works, right? Okay. During that state, he became aware of the archetypal essence. There we go. At the heart of all creation. See? Now, if you saw, I just said that, which is kind of funny because that lasted for several days. Okay. Anyway, he called this self interpreting signature of all things. 2 years later, the experience repeated itself when he fell into a hypnotic trance while gazing at a shiny pewter dish. Again, he saw the signatures that represented the thoughts of the mind of God and manifest in the world. He called the one thing in which thoughts of God took from uh, the source ground. Okay, the source ground is a great mystery, the chaos from which originates good and evil, light and darkness, life and death, joy and suffering, salvation, damnation. It is a ground of souls and angels, all eternal creatures in the ground of heaven and hell, in the visible world, including all existing things, since everything comes from the one thing, the ground, the source ground. The source ground is also another kind of worldview, not worldview, yeah, worldview. And I can't remember who it was that created that concept of the source ground, and how it arose. Now, you can say it's the fabric, right, or the dark matter. that exist within the world, which we have nothing, we know nothing about. You ask even physicists, they don't know what it is. They don't know how to measure it. They don't know how to work with it, look at it, understand it. They put these theories to it, but do they really know? No. And the reality is there's more dark matter. But I do like the idea of the weaver, right? And I think that's kind of, I see it better that way visually. Is that it's like the spider's web, weaving through the darkness, and that those tiny fabrics of web that we cannot see are the material that holds all of this stuff together. And this is a native tradition, this native culture, right? The spider woman, the spider lady who weaved into existence everything that was. The spider web itself being that very, you can't see it, but that very thin, gentle layer that holds the dark matter together so that things can emerge within it. And so that to me seems like the better depiction of how to describe it. Do we really know? Not necessarily. um but we're able to theorize, like, here's how we think it works. And they don't know. So they're calling it the source ground, where everything arises from. Now, I don't think it's arising, I think it's just emerging. Think that's rising indicates that it's elevating, but I think emergence is a better word because it's emerging out of in all directions, not necessarily from the bottom to the top or top to bottom. But we can't, sometimes humans can't think outside of that, right, concept of high to low. We forget that this is a 3D world. There's side to side, there's all over, right? Just like wave your hands in circles. There's not just one way to do it. There's all different ways. So I would say it's an emergence of it. And we see that that material matter emerges from it. Okay. Jacob's vision became even clearer over the next decade. It was as if a secret school were continually in session inside him, that perfected the quality of material he received. um, in one 15-minute revelation that occurred, he traveled to the above and below, what he called the abyss and the abyss, and witnessed generations of all things through the action of three forces emanating from the Godhead. It was a supreme vision. After that, he seemed to be less of him and more of the divine and mystical states. And he got to the point where he simply could not contain them. So this is an important concept to talk about. It's really awesome, right? To go and start to tap into these spaces, but you can go crazy, and some people do. And I don't. Maybe crazy is not the right word to say, but you can almost lose your mind. You can get lost in the thoughts. You can get lost in the mystical life, in the chaos in a way, because that's what it is. It's chaos. And then what we do is we don't know how to ground ourselves back down to earth. And we forget we have a body. And some people do kind of lose their self in a way. So there's this fine line between that as well. Like, people are like, oh, I just want to be spiritually woke and awaken. And what ends up happening is some people actually lose themselves completely. And we don't necessarily, especially in the Western world, have a good way to support those individuals who we call them crazy. We label them as, and they're not. They're just going through a spiritual experience. That's how I see it. So anybody who is schizophrenic, or all of these labels that we've given them, it's just a spiritual happening. And so how do we walk them through that spiritual journey? So it sounded like he didn't know how to turn it off and reground himself back to earth. And I think this is important that we do, because here's the deal: we can apply this information in a practical way. That's why I call it practical use, because how do we actually apply this stuff to our daily life and not just get lost? I could get lost. I have. It's coming back is probably, re-entry is probably the scariest part, right? Coming back to the material world. And we see that with people who have near death experiences and such, right? They want to stay in their beautiful whatever it is. A lot of people say they have the same experience where everything is just warm and it's light and they don't want to come back. They're not afraid when they have that near death experience. But then they come back and it's like, "Oh my god, I want to come back." And we think of it opposite, right? That everybody'd want to come back and not go. And, so we can get lost is what I'm saying. And everybody's looking to elevate and have a spiritual awakening and have all these, and it's good. It's not a bad thing. It's just how do we apply them to the world that we live in without completely losing it? And it's a fine line and it's really not easy. That's the middle path. That's like pulling the information from the above and then actually bringing it down to the below so that you can use it in your life in a practical way, in a way that makes sense, in a way that drives harmony and joy and bliss. So we can work with the above and below. It's just that we don't want to lose ourselves. I mean, you can, but I've seen people go pretty much like crazy is the best word I can use for it, okay? They're not crazy, but that's what it seems, that they seem to lose themselves, okay? Anyway, we'll see what it says here. Okay, it was his supreme vision. After that, he seemed to be less him and more the divine, mystical states. He couldn't contain them. Feverishly, he started writing down his thoughts and produced this first manuscript, Aura, or Morning Readiness, or in the Rising of the Sun. Redness, I'm sorry, Morning Redness in the Rising of the Sun. Copies were circulated by his close friends, but a local pastor got a hold of the copy and insisted that the town council forbid Jacob from writing any more uh, pretensions to theology. For 5 years, Jacob obeyed the injunction and stuck to his trade, but the visions were unrelenting. Okay, and he started putting them on paper again. He produced such voluminous and fascinating work. They were difficult to keep private, and the pressure from authorities forced his exile. So another thing to say, um, alchemists, as alchemists rise and their work starts to become powerful and shape and change the dynamic, they tend to be put under scrutiny and they tend to probably end up, you know, dead or shut up. And then we know this with alchemists, and you wonder why. Well, why? Why is it that the alchemists get shut up so much? Why is it that the people who are practicing alchemy are forbidden to do so? Well, there's a lot of reasons why. And that's why I tell people if you want to understand what's happening in the world, if you want to know and go deeper, alchemy is the way. Alchemy will show you the way in the process. It'll connect you so close to natural law because, see, natural law is the closest thing to the divine. We didn't create natural law. We are just a part of it. We're co-participating in it. Now, natural law gives us that connection to something divine, something greater than, something bigger than, but still a part of. So it's a part of us. And when we tap into it, we start to, it's almost like magic. And people will say it's magic, and that's why they'll say, no, it's evil. Don't do that. It's magic. Now, here's the deal. Yes, it can be called magic. Um, and it can be used for good. But the reality is that it can get in the hands of people who are misusing it. And then that wreaks havoc on everything. So alchemy itself has the ability to change and transform the dialogue, the narrative, the way we engage the world. And it has what it does, and science arose from alchemy. Nobody wanted anybody to do science. Religion didn't want them to do science because chemistry was a result of alchemy. And because of that, we started to look at things like particles and how they connect together and can we make gold. And they started to do that. They started to use base metals and try to make gold and all this stuff. And they separated, the duality came in and they separated the soul from the material world. They started to look at the material. Why? Because religion didn't let them look at this stuff. They would get in trouble for it because it would change the narrative dialogue and the control that these people had the individuals under. So again, alchemy is a powerful tool. It's not something to take lightly. And I say, before you start applying all this stuff to your life, to be ready, because things are going to change. They will. They'll change immensely, to the point where you won't be able to construct your life the same way, basically. And that's why not many people will follow this or continue on the alchemic path or spiritual alchemy. Can be kind of scary for some people. Okay. But for him, because he was having these things and he was producing them, um, they came after him, of course. He appealed to the court, where the panel of theologians was assembled to examine him. Like the priests and scholars who examined Bolognese more than 1,500 years earlier, they were so impressed that they declared him beyond their power to judge. But unlike Bolognese, Jacob um, was at the end of his years when his godlike abilities were acknowledged. So in November, Jacob suddenly became feverish at the home of a friend, knowing that he was about to die, asked to be transported. His wife and 4 children and him, he entered into the ecstatic state and took leave of him one by one. He kissed his wife goodbye and told her she would not survive long after him, which she did not. Then said farewell to his 4 children. Um, as he approached death, he had a loving gaze of the elder son and seemed to keep Jacob from serving the bonds. So he asked his son to turn around and look away immediately, and he let out a deep sigh and expired. Okay. So it's been said that Jacob opened an alchemy book, um, was the day that the secrets of alchemy were irrevertibly revealed to the world. So they're saying that he was the reason why alchemy was revealed to the world. The mystical boy knew instinctively that the vessel of the philosophers was the human body and their stone of the perfect soul. So again, when we talk about the philosopher's stone, people think that it's a stone that if we have it or know how to make it, that we will be immortal. But the reality is that our body, our vessel, is the philosopher's stone, and we get to learn how to take care of it. Um, he knew because he had already experienced within himself the primary operations of spiritual alchemy and was undergoing the fermentation of images and mental content that would prepare him for the ultimate revelation of his own unique signature, the release of his purified essence, and the coagulation of his own immortal stone. So, coagulation is another part of the alchemic process. But as you can see, spiritual alchemy lives within us. It is the actual stages, right? Like it says, of our own unique signature to release the purified essence, where the essence itself gets purified. It's not easy though. He said it was easy. I say it's easy, but it's not easy. Especially today in this world that we live in. Um, because of the communication, right? So the communication has been um we can talk across worlds now. We can talk across many, I can call somebody in India today. I got friends in India. So we had somebody in India show up on this podcast yesterday. We are so interconnected. There's so much information, and it's almost so much that we don't know how to stop the noise. And really, it requires both. So if we stopped and listened to our body ourselves, we would tap into that spiritual essence. We just need to stop and listen. Okay. So I have never desired to learn any sciences, Jacob said of his life. But from the early youth, I strove after salvation of my soul and thought how I might possess the kingdom of heaven, finding within myself a power of adversity, namely the desires that belong to the flesh and blood. I began to fight a hard battle against my corrupted nature, and with the aid of God, I made up my mind to overcome the inherent evil will, to break it, and to enter wholly into the love of God. I therefore then and there resolved to regard myself as one dead in my inherent form until the Spirit of God would take form in me, so that in through him I might conduct my life. That I love that. Good morning, The Rock. That's actually perfect. Perfectly said. That we sort of learn to, and I've talked about this, work through those dark emotions. Not to get rid of them, but to learn how to work through them. And then we allow that energy, that essence of God or the divine or whatever you want to call it, to move through us. And then we become the vessel of God or the house of God, the house of, you know, I just say God, it's just easier. Universe, whatever it is you call it, creator, the grand design, the divine, Yahweh, the many names that we give the God or God. And that we allow that to radiate throughout our entire body, our cellular structure, everything. That vibration, we walk as God. Now, is it easy? No, because we have the monkey mind. We're in a very dense world. I've talked about this before. And because of our density, because we're matter, it's really kind of hard. We have everything fighting against us, right? The construct of our body itself is fighting to stay alive. Think about it. We're made of cells. These cells have to be nurtured and loved in order to continue to move through life. If they start to die out, we die out. So the very fabric of our body is an alchemic process, and it's fighting. It's fighting every day to stay alive, to stay awake, to so you got to understand that we have the ability to say, well, we don't need to fight with it. We can allow that beautiful spirit, good morning, to come through us and help us to move forward. We can actually embody the essence of God. He allowed all of that other stuff, the things that he said, the possession, right? He had to fight a battle against the corrupted nature. It is a battle that we fight. We are warriors. Anybody who does this work and is committed to healing themselves and allowing their self to radiate the essence of love and the God self is going to have a battle with the self. We have been programmed not to love ourselves. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about, like, when I think about this, I'm like, really? We we have to teach ourselves to love ourselves. I mean, that's crazy. Shouldn't we just love ourselves? I mean, no, we battle with that daily. How do I love myself? How do I find myself worthy? We go through these battles with our own self. No wonder we're battling wars. As within, so without. Those people are battling internally to love themselves. If they love themselves, they wouldn't be at war. It just, you can't. You're not at war if love is emanating through every part of your body and every cell. If you're loving yourself, you're loving everything. Even what you would consider the dark, that you can transmute and transform the energy just by your presence. You can go into a space where there's what people would call evil or darkness, and because you embody the essence of love and pure love, that you can transform that energy just by your mere presence. You see, and then people who quote unquote are evil and want to hurt you, if you hold love, pure love, they start to go, oh my God, what did I do? Okay, they freak out. They kind of go, oh my God, like they started. Okay, let's look at the story of Jesus, the same story, right? They were like, stone him, kill him. We want him dead. And then after, they were like, wait, what did we do? Like, oh my God. There was this like awakening. If he would have started throwing stones back, that awakening would have never happened. So it allows us to wake up to the fact that we are love. It changes, and we can do that. We can hold, but it's not easy because we have to battle ourselves. The battle's within. It's not external. It's an internal battle. And it's not an easy one to overcome, right? It's not easy to work through. It's not. He would say it was easy. I would say it was easy, but it's not easy. Okay? Most people, it's very very hard. And sometimes people wonder, is it easier just to take the easy low road where I can just whatever get by? And no, when we're trying to, and I don't want to say perfect our soul, but because our soul's already perfect, where we're trying to work through the hardships so that we can transform our soul into love. It's not such an easy thing. Like, I remember a couple of years ago, that was my New Year's resolution, to love so big everything, no matter what, good, bad, ugly, evil, everything. There was times where it was hard because I was like, wanted to yell and get frustrated, and I did. I allowed myself to go through it, to come back to compassion, to come back to love. But there was that battle. So mastery of this is being able to go through all those emotions in like less than a second, and you could come back to love no matter what. Like, that's a master. Not that they don't feel, not that they don't get those. It's just that the time between how they feel and that anger, they understand how to transmute it, go through all the process in such a short amount of time that you wouldn't even notice it. Our human eye couldn't even notice it. Facial expression wouldn't even change. That's the only difference, is the practice, right? Practice, 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 practice. Work through it. We've got to face it. We've got to move through it. That's the way to do it. Okay. So that's what he said. Therefore, I resolved the regard of myself, one dead that might inherit form. So he killed off, he went through a death, which is a spiritual death, and allowed the light of God to emanate through him completely. Okay. So that he may conduct his life that way. Now, while I was battling, right, a wonderful light arose within my soul. It was the entirely foreign to my unruly nature, but in it I recognized the true nature of God and man, and the relation existing between them, a thing which before that I had never understood, and for which I would never have thought to seek. Although the physical alchemists struggle to pin down the technical details of fermentation, its overwhelming spiritual power was obvious to all who experienced it. You see, here's the distinction in alchemy. The physical alchemists struggled to pin it down technical, like the technical details, meaning that when they took the alchemy into the labs, they the process of fermentation was something that they couldn't pin down. But remember, alchemy was not used or not created for us to use in the material world. That that application of alchemy was to be used on the body and the soul and our connection with the divine. But we took it and we made it an external thing, and then we created duality. That duality kind of set the stage for our demise now, like what we see today. If we recognize that we were all interconnected, and that everything that we choose to do in some way, shape, or form has an impact on the whole, we wouldn't be doing it because we know that it'd be harming ourselves. But we don't. People really kind of think they're individual, and we have a whole bunch of individuals that think that. Like, I'm separate, that everything's not interconnected. Even the other day, I don't know if the rock is on here. I don't need to call you out, but saying, "Oh, it's not our problem." What's going on across the world. Well, it is. It may not be our business, but it's our problem, because whatever results from that is going to impact us because we're all interconnected. There's no, I'm separate from you. Every little thing that happens has a ripple effect in the entire matrix, if you will. That drop ripples, and it may be light and we may not feel it now, but over time we do. There's consequences for every choice we make, and things can happen like this or they can go slowly. So there is There is a consequence, and everything is interconnected. And the systems themselves, when one thing happens to one system, it happens to another. You can think of it as like the water being polluted, right? If you pollute the water, it doesn't just go to one part of the water, it actually ripples into all of the water. And then all of a sudden, all of it's contaminated. So we see this, right? Then it goes into the ground, and then it corrodes the trees, the everything else. So and then it starts to ripple out and more and more and more. And as it grows, it continues to impact everything around it. So you've got to understand what we do has an impact. It has a huge impact, actually. Okay. So they can again, we will learn how to use this process to gain higher inspiration in chapter 15, fermentation, fire of the soul. However, not everyone who has undergone fermentation has understood the experience as well as Jacob, where the process introduces us to realities from which society does not prepare us. It is the job of the next operation, distillation, to purify those experiences so that they do not overwhelm us. That's what I was talking about earlier. You can get overwhelmed and you can lose yourself completely. There's a fine balance between the two. So, as so we can assimilate to the new worldview and use it to guide us to the final steps in alchemy. Now, these steps in alchemy, going through them, can seem terrible and scary and hard. Um, Once you start to go through these processes and you start to hit what they would people would call higher dimensions, you're going to receive information. People are calling it downloads now. Everybody's like, I'm getting downloads. I'm getting downloads, right? That's the favorite word right now. And it, for the alchemist, we would say, okay, you're going through the process of alchemy, but that's fine. Downloads is a perfectly fine word. So you're getting downloads. Sometimes people are wanting more and more and more and more. And the more that you want, and the more that you go after that, the more you're going to get lost. It's going to be really hard to get back to earth and ground yourself again. We go off in the weeds in our stories and what we're seeing. And I know why, because I've been there. I've been there. I understand. And I've had to use I have to stop, I have to turn it off because I have to learn to ground myself, right? So until you can find that fine balance between receiving the information and using it for everyday practical use, it becomes very, very hard to turn it off. And that's where people kind of tip over and have what we call spiritual emergency. It's like they've gone just a little bit over the edge and now they're in this world. They don't know how to ground themselves back to earth, to relate to the earth, to be rooted into the earth where we are. So they're kind of floating. Okay. So there you have it. That is the end of this chapter. We're going to get into the greatest force of all power, purification by the ray of the sun and the moon. Okay. And we'll get into this next time. Yeah. Let me see if I see anything in here that I wanted to point out. No. But we'll go into that, and that's a pretty short chapter. We have the fifth element in here, the distillation, and we go into who went through distillation and stuff. So again, alchemy. Um, Highly encourage it. You get the book, read it yourself, so that you can understand how to apply it to your life. But there is a process, there is a way, and there's always a way out. And we get to choose how we want to move forward. Do we want to continue to move towards um, the darkness and harm and suffering and what we would call sorcery, or do we want to move towards the emergence of illumination? Do we want to grow in love or fear? That's basically a better way to say it. Which way do we want to grow? And people choose fear sometimes, and we see the results and consequences of that, and why we have a crazy world. But people will grow in love, and that is a harder road to take, believe it or not. Watch The Strange Life of Dr. Parnassus, or I can't remember, that's not the name of it, but I know it's Dr. Parnassus. Watch that movie where he strikes a deal. He's a guru who's like levitates, and he strikes a deal with the devil, and we see that people tend to go towards the dark matter. I don't That's not the right word, not dark matter. They tend to go towards the fear. That's better. Trying to change my language and all this, it's really been hard. We've been programmed so much to think of darkness as evil, and it's not all evil. Um, so to go towards the fear rather than to go towards love is a harder road, not easier. It's harder. Why? Because of our monkey mind and all the stuff we make up that we're not enough. We're not worthy. We don't matter. Or we're shame. Shame. I was reading about shame the other day, which I want to read on here actually. Maybe I'll read that tomorrow before I start chapter 8. Which is a really good book. Daring Bravely, I think it's called. Yeah, Daring Greatly, not Bravely. Daring Greatly. Brene Brown, which is she's pretty awesome. At first, I was like, Brene Brown, who's this woman? And then I started listening to her. I'm like, oh, okay, I like her. I really do. I like what she has to say about, us being vulnerable and working through those dark emotions, which I think is timely for the chapter we just read. I think I'll read Brene Brown, a chapter out of her book that I just read um, the other day. And I think that would be super helpful to understand how shame really, I think, can spiral us into a state of fear, which can spiral us to do crazy things. So, shame being one, and really looking at what that means, and then kind of working through that. Okay, so there you have it. A lot of people don't want to step outside their boxes. We are meeting last night, and I felt out of place because they were closed minded. Constantly a battle because society creates pressure around us from the moment we're born. Yeah, they do. And it's yes, people do live in their boxes. And honestly, we can tell, right? Like who would come to these podcasts is people that are not, they're trying to understand how to break those boxes down or expand the box if it's a box. But I would say expand the circle, not the box, maybe. Um that's what people come here and they're like, okay, well, how do I expand? Right? How do I expand consciousness? How do I open up to new ways of thinking about the world? How do I engage in life differently? All of those things where you cannot maybe connect with individuals that can't see that, right? And a lot of it starts, I'll just end this way. A lot of it starts with people having to be right about who they are. People feel the need to be right. The second that you have to be right about something is the second that you close yourself off from actually learning anything. Okay. And that's a hard one. So we want to be right about the stuff that we do. We want to be right about it. And then what ends up happening, right, is that we end up closing ourselves off from getting new information. So we always say, seek to understand and listen first. Let all that information come in, right? And you might actually be surprised that you see life in a different way. People are afraid of that though, because what would that mean if they were wrong? Well, they'd have to change everything, right? So it's really hard for people to expand consciousness. Okay. People think they're elevating consciousness and they're not. They're expanding it. And it's hard to expand consciousness. If you think you're elevating it, then you're probably not. I would say you're not actually, you're still putting yourself on an ivory tower, basically, is what I'm saying. You're putting yourself above when you're saying, I'm above all, right? Oh, we're just on a higher level of consciousness. We just know more. We're just more enlightened. Those people, you're not more anything. You're expanded, perhaps, but that expansion opens up the opportunity for others to engage in that expansion. And as we expand, we allow more space. We allow more space, not more stuff, more space. See, difference. We allow more opportunity to see other worldviews, to hear people more, to listen more. We start to expand our consciousness. So we're like, oh, and then we interrelate to more. And then we can connect the dots to nearly anything. Kind of cool, actually. All those epiphanies and fire, your brain just starts to fire off and you start to have these awakenings where you're going, oh, wow. And then, oh, this connects to that. And this, people will say, well, how did you come to this work? How did you? And really, what happened is my neural pathways fire together to understand a bigger picture. That's it. I could see a bigger picture because of it. So as you do this, right, your neural pathways, your brain, neuroplasticity, all that stuff, and these interconnections, they start to connect and you start to see, and that's epiphany, really. It's just your brain firing off and going, oh, I see this in a whole different way now. And I can see how everything is interconnected. I can see how this connects to that, to that, to that. I could go from this subject to end up on an entirely different subject, but they're all interconnected and related. And you just go on and on and on. And it's crazy. It's pretty cool. Okay, so there you have it. All right. Okay, so there you have it. I love you guys. Of course, I will be seeing you tomorrow. I think I'll read Brene Brown's Daring Greatly. I think that talks about sort of the dark, icky feelings of shame and, how to perhaps overcome that, um, work through it. Okay. All right, so there you have it. Love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye bye.